The ally who blinked, why the greatest danger to NATO may now come from within. For 8 decades, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has lived by a simple premise: that danger comes from elsewhere, from the ruins of post-war Europe to the frozen standoffs of the Cold War, from the Balkans to Afghanistan. NATO was forged to confront threats that arrived from beyond its borders. Its anxieties were external, its adversaries visible, its mission clear. When crises erupted, they came with flags, armies and ideologies attached. Today, that clarity has dissolved. The most unsettling challenge confronting the alliance no longer advances from Moscow, Beijing, or Tehran. It emerges instead from the capital that once guaranteed NATO's permanence. The United States, long the alliance's anchor, is now its principal source of uncertainty. When General Sir Richard Shirreff, NATO's former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, declared that Donald Trump represented a greater threat to the alliance than Vladimir Putin, the remark startled not because it was incendiary, but because it forced an uncomfortable reconsideration of how institutions fail. Empires collapse from defeat. Alliances more often decay from doubt. NATO's original bargain, NATO was never merely a military pact. It was a psychological contract. Europe, exhausted and impoverished after the Second World War, accepted American leadership in exchange for security. The United States, wary of repeating its interwar retreat into isolationism, accepted permanent overseas commitments in exchange for political influence and strategic depth. The bargain was asymmetrical, but mutually beneficial. America gained forward deployment, alliance legitimacy, and global reach. Europe gained deterrence, stability, and time to rebuild. The system worked because each side believed the other's commitments were enduring. Article 5, the promise that an attack on one would be treated as an attack on all, was deliberately vague. Its power lay not in legal precision, but in assumed intent. No enemy ever doubted that Washington would respond. That assumption became NATO's true foundation. The long peace and the quiet drift. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO's purpose blurred but did not vanish. Instead, it expanded, geographically and conceptually. The alliance absorbed former Warsaw Pact states, ventured beyond Europe, and redefined itself as a manager of crises rather than merely a bulwark against invasion. From Bosnia to Kosovo, from Libya to Afghanistan, NATO learned to operate in a world where threats were diffuse rather than existential. Yet this success carried a cost. Europe grew comfortable. Defense budgets shrank. Strategic culture softened. American protection became a permanent condition rather than a privilege requiring maintenance. In Washington, irritation accumulated quietly. Presidents complained. Think tanks warned. Congressional hearings grumbled about burden sharing, but no American leader questioned the alliance's legitimacy itself, until Donald Trump's worldview, alliances as liabilities. Mr. Trump did not approach foreign policy as previous presidents had done, through doctrine, history, or institutional memory. He approached it as a businessperson surveying a balance sheet: who pays? Who profits? Who takes advantage? In this calculus, alliances appeared suspect. They constrained freedom of action, demanded obligations, and delivered benefits that were indirect rather than transactional. Security guarantees cannot be invoiced. Deterrence produced no visible revenue. Influence, reputation and stability were dismissed as abstractions. What mattered were percentages. If allies spent less, America was being cheated. This logic resonated domestically. Many Americans questioned why the richest continent still depended on U.S. taxpayers for defense. Mr. Trump did not invent this sentiment, he amplified it, but he transformed grievance into threat. Where previous presidents used persuasion, he used conditionality. Where others sought reform, he dangled abandonment. In doing so, he changed the nature of alliance politics, from skepticism to strategic uncertainty. During his first term, Mr. Trump's hostility toward NATO was partially involved by advisors, institutions, and crises. His second term has been markedly different. Constraints have loosened. Rhetoric has sharpened. And the signal sent to allies has grown starker. Security, he implies, is no longer automatic. This shift matters enormously. Deterrence functions on credibility, not capacity. NATO's armies remain formidable. American forces are still present. But if adversaries suspect that political hesitation might delay or dilute response, deterrence erodes. The problem is not whether America would fight, it is whether it would fight immediately, instinctively, without bargaining. Uncertainty invites miscalculations. The Greenland moment. Nothing illustrated this danger more vividly than Mr. Trump's repeated threats regarding Greenland. On paper, the episode appeared surreal. The idea that the United States might use force to seize a vast, icy island belonging to Denmark, a NATO ally, seemed absurd, yet alliances are not damaged by plausibility. They are damaged by precedent. The significance of Greenland was not territorial but symbolic. For the first time in NATO's history, the alliance's leading power had publicly questioned the sovereignty of another member. No treaty contingency anticipated such a scenario. NATO was built to repel invasion, not to arbitrate it among its own. Even when Mr. Trump later insisted he did not intend to use force, the damage lingered. Trust once shaken does not reset automatically. In European capitals, diplomats asked privately what had once been unthinkable: if Washington could threaten Denmark, what did membership truly guarantee? Threats that need not be conducted. Critics of Mr. Trump often point to his tendency to retreat, threatening escalation before settling for negotiation. Hence the mocking acronym TACO. Trump always chickens out, but alliance politics operates differently from bilateral bargaining. In commerce, bluster may be forgiven. In security, it corrodes foundations. Military alliances rely on predictability. Ambiguity is tolerable only toward adversaries, not toward partners. When the leader of an alliance brandishes threats, even theatrically, the signal received is not strength but volatility. Volatility forces allies to plan for worst-case scenarios, and planning for American absence inevitably reduces American influence. Putin, the familiar enemy. Contrast this with Vladimir Putin. Mr. Putin is ruthless, revisionist and dangerous, but he is legible. His objectives are known. His methods are brutal but consistent. His hostility toward NATO is neither hidden nor surprising. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the shock was not strategic but moral. Western governments had underestimated his willingness to absorb costs, yet the invasion clarified something essential: that NATO still mattered. The alliance responded with unity. Defense spending rose. Enlargement accelerated. Political resolve hardened. Far from destroying NATO, Mr. Putin revived it. He reminded Europeans what insecurity looks like. The paradox of unity through fear. War, paradoxically, simplified Western politics. Faced with tanks crossing borders, internal disputes faded. Strategic priorities aligned. The language of deterrence returned. NATO regained its original coherence. Mr. Putin's aggression revalidated the alliance's logic. Mr. Trump's behavior challenges it. Where one threat consolidates, the other destabilizes. This is the uncomfortable truth beneath General Shurev's provocation. Decoupling without departure. The most consequential development of the past year has not been troop withdrawals or treaty revisions. It has been something quieter: mental decoupling. European leaders increasingly treat American commitment as contingent rather than permanent. This does not mean they expect abandonment tomorrow. But they no longer assume protection as an axiom. Assumptions, once lost, are rarely restored. Defense ministries now plan with caveats. Strategic papers include conditional language. Investment decisions increasingly emphasize autonomy. This is not anti-Americanism. It is risk management, and it represents a fundamental shift in how NATO functions. The impulse of Europeanization, in response, calls to Europeanize NATO have grown louder. The argument is straightforward: Europe must be capable of defending itself, at least conventionally, without automatic American intervention. This idea has circulated for decades, championed most vocally by France. It was long dismissed as unrealistic or divisive. Mr. Trump has made it unavoidable. European defense integration, once aspirational, is now framed as insurance. Yet Europeanization faces daunting obstacles. Europe lacks unified command structures, coherent procurement systems, and a shared strategic culture. National interests diverge. Political consensus is fragile, moreover. Autonomy is expensive, strategic independence cannot be improvised. It requires years of sustained investment, precisely what electorates often resist. Still, uncertainty concentrates minds. What decades of rhetoric could not achieve, American unpredictability may yet force a brittle transition. The danger lies in the transition period. As Europe seeks greater autonomy while still depending heavily on American capabilities, the alliance enters a liminal phase. Neither fully integrated nor fully independent, this is precisely when deterrence is weakest. Adversaries thrive in ambiguity. Russia, watching this evolution, requires no sudden breakthroughs. It merely waits. Strategic patience has always been Moscow's advantage. The American defense, burden sharing. The White House rejects the narrative of alliance damage. Officials point to increased defense spending across Europe, crediting Mr. Trump's pressure tactics. They argue that discomfort is necessary medicine. There is truth here. NATO members have indeed increased military budgets significantly, but correlation is not causation alone. A sizable portion of this increase can be attributed to Russia's invasion rather than to perceived threats from the United States. Moreover, there is a distinction between extracting contributions and sustaining confidence. Alliances can be pressured into paying more. They cannot be coerced into believing more. Fear produces compliance, belief produces cohesion. NATO requires both. Transactional security's hidden cost. Transnationalism creates perverse incentives. If protection depends on payment, then security becomes negotiable. If it becomes negotiable, it becomes uncertain. And if it becomes uncertain, deterrence falters. An adversary does not need to defeat NATO militarily. It needs only to suspect that response might be delayed by negotiation. The alliance then loses its most powerful asset, automaticity. Mr. Trump may believe that leverage increases strength. In deterrence, leverage often weakens it. Domestic politics restraint. Some analysts believe U.S. public opinion limits excess. Polling shows little appetite for annexation rhetoric or confrontation with allies. Electoral vulnerability, they suggest, limits how far Mr. Trump can go, yet foreign policy rarely determines elections. The erosion of alliances happens incrementally, invisibly. Its costs materialize slowly. Its benefits are abstract. Voters rarely punish leaders for weakening institutions whose collapse lies beyond the electoral cycle. The danger, therefore, is not sudden rupture, but cumulative decay, a distracted hegemon. From a global perspective, the consequences extend far beyond Europe. An America consumed by internal division and alliance disputes becomes strategically distracted. China watches closely, so does Iran, but it is Russia that benefits most immediately. A divided West requires fewer resources to contain. If Europe must invest heavily in autonomy while America debates commitment, strategic bandwidth shrinks. Mr. Putin's objectives are served not through victory, but through paralysis. The rules-based order and its fragility. The post-war order rested on a quiet assumption that the strongest power would restrain itself. Rules mattered because those who could violate them chose not. When restraint disappears, rules lose authority. Mr. Putin shattered rules through aggression. Mr. Trump undermines them through indifference. One shock, the other exhaustion. Over time, exhaustion is often more lethal. The institutional test. Institutions survive crises. They struggle with erosion. NATO has weathered wars, expansions, and internal disagreements. But it has never faced prolonged uncertainty about its core guarantor. This is the real test of the Trump era, not whether the alliance collapses, but whether it quietly transforms into something thinner, more conditional, less credible. An alliance can exist on paper long after its spirit has faded. An uncertain future ahead. Even if American policy shifts again in future administrations, scars remain. Allies remember vulnerability. Once contingency planning begins, it does not end. The idea that Europe might one day need to stand alone has entered mainstream thinking. That idea cannot be unthought. The ultimate irony, Mr. Trump often claims he has strengthened NATO, in a narrow financial sense, but strength is not merely measured in spending. It is measured in belief. The paradox is stark. Vladimir Putin reminded NATO why it exists. Donald Trump forced it to question whether it can rely on its leader. One clarified purpose, the other blurred commitment. History suggests which challenge is harder to overcome. the alliance at a crossroads. NATO today stands not on the brink of collapse, but at a crossroads. One path leads toward renewed cohesion, if uncertainty is resolved, trust restored, and leadership reaffirmed. The other leads toward managed fragmentation, cooperation without conviction, deterrence without certainty, unity without instinct. Such an alliance may persist, but it will deter less, reassure less, and matter less. That outcome would not be the result of invasion, it would be the consequence of doubt. The danger of blinking, General Shureff's warning, stripped of provocation, is institutional rather than personal. The gravest threats to systems often come not from those who oppose them, but from those who no longer believe in them. NATO was built on faith, faith in shared interests, shared destiny, and shared defense. When the ally who once embodied that faith begins to blink, others must decide whether to wait, or to look elsewhere. That decision, now unfolding quietly across Europe, may shape Western security long after this presidency ends. And in that sense, the greatest danger to NATO today may not be the enemy it has always known, but the uncertainty it has never had to face before.